Thank you very much. Cool. I think I have control. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice little break there. So the next two modules that we're going to deal with, I think probably some of this I've already alluded to in the first two modules, in fact. So in fact, the very last one, difficult not to mention certificate services when we're dealing with things like EFS and the actual employment of cryptography. So, so again, I sort of apologize to you for the fact that there might be a little bit of repetition that's coming up here, but then, that's not a bad thing. And then the second module that we're going to cover when we talk about legislation, a little bit about regulation, policies and things like that as well. I think probably will be done in reasonably good time. So again, I won't make any promises to the fact that you can have an early stack on a Friday, because I never make those kind of promises, but I think we'll get through this in a shorter period than we did this morning's session. So you might be shouting hallelujah at the screen now. Hopefully not. So this little session then, we're looking at the public key infrastructure. Now this is the one that I truly love delivering, I suppose, really, because if there was ever anything that needed demystifying, it's this beast, okay, of the PKI. I've been training, in fact, I've been looking at this for years now, I suppose, really, and I've been training this and implementing it, I suppose, really for a good 15 years or so, probably even more than that. And to start off with, the nuts and bolts of it were quite complicated and confusing, just in my mind, really. Whether they're complicated or confusing to other people, I don't know. And it took me a little while, really, just sort of engineering it, I suppose, really, to get it all together. And then you sort of factor in a whole load of different aspects to the nuts and bolts of it. It can be quite complicated, and things changed invariably sort of probably a good 10 years ago now, with the way that sort of the internet explosion took place when we're talking about PKI, and changes, I suppose, really on, if I can quote Microsoft's best practice and things like that. So I'm coming at this predominantly from a Microsoft background, admittedly, but it doesn't really make any difference. Just because I come from a Microsoft background, you can quite easily just apply these kind of things theoretically and practically into any kind of area that you're looking at with a PKI. You see from the slide here, when I kind of apologize to you for the fact that I'm repeating myself. Well, we are, because here with the PKI, this is what it affords. So again, we're talking about I suppose the fundamentals of what encryption, cryptography will do for you. So confidentiality, integrity, non-repudiation, authentication. But this time we're talking about invariably giving you information assurance using both types of systems, remember. So it's not just about asymmetric systems, even though that leads us into the name of the public key infrastructure. PKI will also use symmetric systems alongside it as well. So it's not uncommon. When we're dealing with the PKI, what is it? Well, it's everything. So the technical controls, the people controls, the procedural controls that you put into place. So this is all underpinned again by policy, the physical controls as well. So we're talking about the servers, we're talking about the connections that are put into place as well to enable this. So again, I'm a big fan of the fact that we don't just stick our eggs in one basket, as it were, when we think, oh yeah, I'm a firewall kind of dude, so I'm all about technical controls and technical implications of that. Well, the reality is that even though you might be looking after network devices, you're the person that looks after the firewall, the IDSs and the IPSs and all those kind of things, you're still being very much regulated by the policies. Okay, the technical controls that you put into place are just as good as the policies, and the policies are just as important as everything else in here. And they kind of get dumbed down a little bit when we're talking about security, because it's the boring bit. It's the bit that managers deal with. Well, that's not true. The procedures and the policies, I would suggest, is a good line of business to get into, and everybody has got something to say about that as well. So at sort of every level. So it shouldn't really shock you too much to see that we're talking about procedures and policies and standards that are layered in here as well. Okay, so again, none of that kind of goes away. From the administration side of things, it can be, we're talking about the systems administrators that look after your PKI for you, invariably are advanced administrators. to set up a PKI, in fact, you have to be an enterprise administrator within an Active Directory. So that's the top level that you can be. So we're not talking about necessarily somebody who's just cutting their teeth in service desks. It's getting involved in this, but having an understanding, I suppose, of the integration of where you sit within that framework, if that's the kind of level you're coming in at, is quite useful. In fact, so again, this delivery that I do here hopefully cuts across all aspects. So whether you're a technician, whether you're a manager, whether you're doing risk assessments, or whether you're actually looking at it from that kind of thing, auditing, okay, a little bit of an understanding about what this PKI is all about and how it kind of fits together kind of goes a long way. Now, this would be, to be completely honest with you, you're coming on a server course. If you're doing a Microsoft server course with us, we're probably talking about 4 hours worth of delivery with a whole series of labs, and none of that ever goes away. Once you've got your CA set up and established and things like that, then you're working at it like a good one. The reality is that, again, in the classroom environment, I normally demo this by actually establishing a certification authority using a Microsoft server, and it takes 5 minutes. You know, the actual if you click next, thank you very much indeed, bing bang bosh, 5 minutes, without actually giving it any kind of thought to the policies, the procedures, and the standards. That's where the time takes. Okay, it's really getting the blueprint into place that does this. So you can see here that even though it says administration in here, that goes up and down as well. So that's controlled by the technical way that you administer the server, and indeed the role on the server, and indeed the policies and procedures either from the management or from your IT infrastructure, from your security team. The certificates themselves are formed either as a bespoke set of certificates. There are default certificates that you can use quite nicely, no problem at all with those in most cases within a normal kind of working environment, but you can create your own depending upon the type of certification authority that you have established. And again, they're used for a whole wide range of different areas. So it's not just about encryption and digitally signing stuff. Your certification services can be used. Smart cards, for example, for authentication processes, which again are quite widely used. And then we get into the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of why you would study the cryptography side of things to actually know the cryptographic keys. And again, if I kind of go back to one of the first things that I spoke about, in this case, where we're talking about strongest and biggest and best, doesn't necessarily mean it is the best for you to use on your system. So this is where you would need to do a little bit of homework to make sure that the algorithms, the ciphers, the encryption systems that you're using are actually going to work on the systems that you've got. So, and here we're talking about operating systems, we're talking about applications, we're talking about software levels, because not everything is as in tune as you think it might be. Okay, if you've got legacy applications and legacy service systems running, you're invariably going to find that you're using older legacy encryption systems, which might be great, okay, and they might be 10 years old, but it still might be quite robust, okay? So don't just think that moving up into Windows 10 and Server 2019 and bringing all of those cryptographic functions to play is going to be world beating for you, because what you may find is that your old legacy applications, your old legacy systems can't communicate now with the systems that are using those encryption protocols, and so the whole thing falls apart. That's availability that I'm talking about. So that's where you really need to get into doing your homework, okay, and doing the research for this. Okay, that's a skill. Okay, that comes with a degree of skill, a degree of training, of course, and a degree of experience in handling these things. So again, not all of that obviously I can cover within the short period of time that we've got on this. We've already mentioned this beast that's called a certificate. In fact, we've seen an example of that. So Bob and Alice, when they were exchanging secret messages there on the local system, were using a certificate. In fact, so Bob had a certificate, Alice had a certificate, and within that certificate was the information that pertains to most of what you can see on this list, in fact. So the thing that we kind of looked at were public key information and validity dates. So remember, the self-signed certificate signed by Alice for Alice had 100 years on it, which is obviously hopefully going to see Alice through her, well, we'll see Alice through her life on the network, of course, but it's far too long. If I am a cryptanalysis, so again, without giving away too many kind of secrets within this environment, all I need is sufficient amount of data and a sufficient amount of time, and I'll unravel your encryption. I will break your codes. No problem at all with that. I have the mathematical power, I have the compute power, we have the brain power, we have the knowledge of the ciphers. All we need is time. Okay, and exactly the same thing can be said with passwords. So at a lesser level, all I need to unravel the hashes that you're using is a degree of time. Okay, and the right kind of systems and the right kind of techniques, which are easy. The systems and the techniques are easy to control. Time is not, of course. So if you allow me 100 years to have a go at unraveling the system, that's plenty of time. Okay, that's almost like a non-expiring password to me, which means that I've got plenty of time to be dealing with this. Okay, so all of these kind of elements are also then processed in when we create a template that allows you to create this thing called a certificate, and that's just a .cer file. Okay, and the different usages of these, as I said, is as long as your arm, really. So what have we mentioned? So we've obviously spoken about email. We've spoken about code signing. Wildcard certificates are the way that these are issued invariably is what we're talking about here. So these are generally done on a domain or a domain tree, for example. So google.com, google.co.uk, for example, and the domains that sit with underneath that, so sales.google.com.co.uk, for example, would all be this hierarchical structure that we put into place. Now, just hold that thought, because I have hopefully a neat little analogy that I'm going to run through you as well, which might explain this a little better. Okay, when we're talking about these hierarchical structures that we put into place for the PKI, I'm all about analogy. I love telling stories that hopefully sort of paint the picture of how things work. So again, I don't need to really read this list out to you. You can see that it's quite wide and varied, and invariably you will find that you come across quite a few of these, in fact, in your day-to-day running using certificate services. Now, the beautiful thing about certificate services is it's invariably completely transparent to the end user and to the systems. That's a good PKI working. Okay, if you get no errors, if you get no indication at all that something is running in the background in order to secure up your data or to secure up your processes and connections, for example, you've got a good PKI working. Invariably, if a user is aware of, by virtue of delays or pop-ups or kind of indications and things like that, something needs a bit of fine-tuning in there, and that then goes back down to the administration side of things. Okay, and we see this from time to time, of course, because mistakes are made and invariably errors do creep in. Certificates is just a digital file, isn't it, at the end of the day? So it can become corrupt. The whole world really sort of relies on certification authorities, these CAs. Now you can see here that we're talking about the organizational structure when we talk about certification authority, which is invariably broken down into subordinates, okay, into different areas. Now, this is one of those kind of areas that when I first started with Microsoft, I'll completely admit, was a very gray area for me. It's not something that I necessarily worked on in the military because I just didn't touch these systems at all. I was aware of the presence, I suppose, really. But when I then started to study it and work alongside the people that knew these things well, it was something that I kind of had to morph into fairly slowly. And back in the day, if there anybody out there that can remember the good old days of the MCSA, MCSEs, those certification strands, there was a couple of great courses, in fact, that you could take. One of them looked after the security and networking, that looked after the PKI. And then there was a great little course that Microsoft came up with, which was all about designing and implementing security. And that's the one that I took, in fact, to get my MCSE. So I had a bracket security after my name, by virtue of the fact that I went down the security route rather than looking at exchange or messaging. And that then, the point of this story is that the fact that at that point, kind of light started going on about how complex this can actually be from a design point of view is not something that you're going to do on the back of a beer mat on a Friday night to work out your PKI justification authorities, and it is very, very bespoke to your organization and what you want to use it for. So again, this invariably, that course was a whole week. It was a 5-day course with a 3-hour exam on the end of it. So it was quite a lengthy course to go into. And the breaking down of this, I suppose, really, when we're looking at the topology of how your CAs are going to work, will depend upon the size of your organization, the nature of the organization, and what you want the certificates for. So, for example, you may have a very, very small infrastructure, a very small network, which invariably only needs one server to look after it. So you've got everything all in one place. Now, I probably wouldn't advocate that that's a good idea, because by virtue of the fact I've said everything in one place, you've also then got a single point of failure. And also here, we're talking about a very high level of security posturing that needs to be put into place for your root certification authority. And that's the start of this process in the creation of a root CA. Most organizations that I've worked with invariably will establish a root certification authority and then very quickly start to establish a series of subordinates. Now, this is where it all then gets a little bit grey and woolly, unfortunately, because those could be set up by department, they can be set up nationally, they can be set up internationally, or they can be set up as per how you want your certificates to be deployed. So I can have them within Active Directory, outside of Active Directory, for the UK, for the French, for the Germans, or for code signing, for encryption, for digitally signing, and so on and so forth. So however you map this structure is completely bespoke to your internal organization. Okay, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just one size doesn't fit all with this. You may find over a period of time that you've taken the wrong way of looking at it. So it is a bit of a nightmare to unravel it as it's coming down through. And it's a bit like, but very different, I suppose, completely different, but a bit like designing Active Directory when we're looking at organizational unit structures. So again, there's a design element to that as well, where you have your domain at the top, and then you subdomain, or you have your organizational units that sit underneath of the domain, and you have to start thinking about, well, do I want those to be by department or by function or by international groupings and so on and so forth. And again, one size doesn't fit all with that as well. There's no right or wrong answer to this. But if we cut to the crux of this, you can see at the bottom of the slide here that the root certification authority invariably is going to offload, or is going to appoint subordinates to do the work for it. Okay, it is not unusual in most cases for a root to be established and then taken offline. Okay, you've then got the uppermost security element of your network, all of your keys invariably offline. So if it's offline, nobody can attack it, nobody can breach it. Okay, it will need to come online periodically, because at the end of the day, it will need to update and be updated in the process. But that, again, that can be managed in a nice, safe, secure environment. Now, back in the good old days, I'm going to say back before virtualization, this was a physical asset to you. So this could have been a server in your server room, which you invariably promoted, got it up onto the certification authority, got it as a root CA, and then unplugged it, which was a waste of an asset, a waste of a resource, waste of hardware, but it was a necessary waste, unfortunately. These days, of course, we're talking about a digital file in the form of a virtual machine, which can quite easily be spun up and spun down again. And that could be your root CA, stored in any secure mechanism that you want to provide. That could be even a physical safe, stick it in the safe, okay, on a hard drive. And so, so there are plenty of ways of doing that as well, but that invariably means that you're putting your crown jewels in a nice, safe environment, okay, off the network. As soon as it's on the network, it becomes vulnerable, of course. But of course, it has zero vulnerability. Zero availability, I beg your pardon, so it needs to come back on over periods of time. The same is true for your subordinates. They need to be kept safe and sound, of course, because you don't want those to be hit or attacked in any way, shape, or form, or compromised. Okay, because as soon as any element in this structure becomes compromised, the whole thing, like a deck of cards, house of cards, will fall over. Okay, so here in the example that we've got here are a couple of examples of what you could potentially implement. And so you've got a root certification authority, an RA, a registration authority, intermediate CAs, so invariably sitting below the root, that may look after certain areas, certain geographical locations, or certain departments in some cases as well. And then a basic issuing CA, which invariably just pumps out certificates, okay, which can be automatic or manual in the process. And so the whole model here requires an element of trust. So this compromise thing that I was talking about in here is all to do with a trust model. Okay, now from a modeling point of view, again, there are several ways that you can do this, several topologies that you can do. And again, it depends on whether we're talking about something that's on the inside of your network. So we're talking about your own private, say an enterprise or standalone CA. So enterprise is one that's within Active Directory. A standalone CA is something that stands outside of Active Directory. and doesn't really have the full benefit of the automation that comes with AD. So, and again, I'll talk to you about that. I'll explain that a little further as we go down the line. And then we go out onto the internet, where this is very widely used and accepted, which uses invariably some kind of web of trust. And again, we've seen some of that with PGP, for example, which uses a web of trust for its certificate handling for email systems, and GPG, a very similar process. And there's a lot of these web of trust that sit outside. And indeed, invariably, if you kind of elude that almost as sort of blockchain kind of arrangement, which is a different environment altogether, but similar kind of concept. And also what you can have is a crossover between your internal certification authority and your external certification authorities as well. So if you've got public facing websites, for example, that need to be trusted by public customers coming from a public internet, for example, onto your network, then this is how this happens. Now, ISPs and hosting platforms generally look after that for us for these days. Okay, although that said, there are still plenty of businesses and organizations that will have hosting rights on the inside of their firewall, for example, that allow for public access into the DMZ for surfing and for shopping or for whatever reasons. But these days, invariably, you find that that's invariably going to go out to a hosting company, out onto a cloud-based company, and they then deal with it. But even though we're outsourcing that to somebody else, all we're doing is giving somebody else that problem to contend with the way that we're using crossovers when it comes to certificate handling as well. So the good news is, for those of us that want to be IT technicians, is that you may remember I don't know when it was probably 10 years ago. I just put a nominal figure on it. 10 years ago, when somebody said, the cloud is the end of IT as we know it. All us IT technicians were going to be out of work because it's all going to go out into this cloud thing. So nothing's going to be done on premise or in-site networking and all that kind of stuff is all going to go out into the cloud. What has happened by that is, in fact, that IT jobs have grown by virtue of the fact that the cloud is there expanded. And what I think IT technicians forgot was the fact that these data centers and these cloud-based resources need IT technicians to look after them. So quite how they thought that this was ever going to run, with kind of pixie and fairy dust out there on the internet, perhaps, was not quite right. And invariably, what's now happened, of course, is that you can fine-tune your internal premise IT resources to do exactly what they're paid for. Okay, look after you on the inside rather than messing around with stuff that was invariably nothing to do with them. Okay, so the world is good, really, when it comes to these kind of things. It is a very convoluted environment, however, when we're dealing with crossovers between internal PKIs and public PKIs, if you are hosting them. Okay, and back in the day, what used to happen was that our domains, so here I'm talking about an Active Directory domain from a Microsoft point of view, had to have a naming convention, of course, which was unique to the inside of your network. And that was fine as long as it stayed within your internal firewall. As soon as we started to get public interaction with our .local domains, for example, it broke. So the certification authorities that don't use .local domain names, for example, out on the internet, would never work. So this crossover, again, has to be fairly well administered, okay, and documented. And you have to look at the construct of this to make sure effectively that internal certification authorities can also communicate with external certification authorities if you're going to be using that crossover mechanism. The best thing to do now, of course, is to outsource it, okay, and let your ISPs or let your hosted companies deal with that, because those invariably are the expert areas that they deal with. Okay, but that is quite a skill. Okay, that's quite an administrative burden that we put on them to do that. And it works quite nicely, of course, because they're experts within that internet field. The other model you can see in here, which is a fairly straightforward and standard one, which I'll explain to you, is something called a hierarchical model. So it goes up and down, okay, up and down, and maybe it goes across as well. So the hierarchical model is the one that Phil uses for his analogy. Okay, and there's two reasons for this. One, because it tells a good story and hopefully puts it into words of one syllable that that we can all understand and hopefully sort of relate to. And also it shows you invariably how the internet works in this way as well. So when I move away from the storytelling and go up into the real world environment, you hopefully will see exactly how this works. So in a nutshell, how does the CA work? As I've just mentioned, life starts with a root certification authority. Okay, has to be signed off by a senior administrator, created by a senior administrator. And part of that process is that your root CA effectively signs itself. Okay, so there's a self-signed certificate that comes into place here under the administration of the enterprise administrator, if we're talking about an internal resource in here. So that's where the trust starts. Okay, so our certificate trust, okay, all starts at the root. And as we just mentioned, closely following that, the root is going to then appoint subordinates, excuse me. These then allow you to offset the tasks from the root. Now, the number of subordinates you have, the roles that they play will be dependent upon the size of your network and what you want your CA to actually do for you. But in most cases, as I've mentioned as well, at this point in time, the root is then removed from the network, disconnected. Okay, physically gone. The order here, the hierarchical order in here, then gives you your certificate trust list. Okay, the CTL, or the certificate trusts, the hierarchical trusts, I should say, rather than CTL, that's something different. Okay, and this certificate trust in here is the path in which it goes from the lower echelon, or the subordinate CAs, up to the root. And if at any given point in my little green dotted line or the red down arrows here, there's a compromise or a break in that trust, the whole thing collapses, okay, which is why this is a very safe, secure environment for us to be working in. Okay, now again, very much tongue-in-cheek here and using an analogy to work this through. The way that I like to kind of equate this to, he says he's smiling already, is a little bit like the way that a government works. So here on the left-hand side of this, we have got number 10 Downing Street, seat head of Her Majesty's government. So again, I'm not going to get all political on your backsides with all of this, okay? And it's all very much tongue-in-cheek, of course. But when we look at number 10 Downing Street and the people that look after us from that point of view, that's where our trust relies, okay? When they say wear a mask, we wear masks. When they say distance 2 meters, we distance 2 meters. When they say no, wash your hands, we go wash our hands. And we trust them to be doing the right thing and making the laws and the regulations work for us, because we're hopefully our interests are their interests. So that's what they're there to do. Okay, so all trust stops at number 10 Downing Street. Some of you might be laughing at this point in time. What I have noticed, however, is that with the government, they don't do everything. Okay, so you don't expect Boris to be sat at number 10. Boris, is that a little informal? You don't expect the Prime Minister to be sat at number 10, doing everything, signing everything, making up all the laws of the land, being an expert in absolutely everything that he touches. Okay, I'm sure he's an expert in something, but I'm not overly certain what that is at this moment in time. And so what they have done is they've appointed subordinates. So in my example here, they've supported they've put up something called the Ministry of Transport. There are lots of these. So here in the UK, we have lots of different ministries that look after us for different areas. So Ministry of Agriculture, Defence, so on and so forth. And they look after the jurisdiction. They have their jurisdictions to look after the areas of interest for their specific departments. So this could be sales, marketing, research. It could be the Brits, the French, the Dutch. Okay, it could be for code signing. It could be for digital signing. It could be for whatever reason you need to use your certificates for. But in this case, we're talking about all things transport. Now, the Ministry of Transport are also very, very busy, because they look after boats and planes and trains and rockets and horses and skateboards and any other mode of transport that you can think of. It all comes under their jurisdiction. So they're busy people, okay, looking after us from a Ministry of Transport point of view. But they have, under the guidance of the government, HMG, got a set of regulations and policies and procedures and plans in place that regulate us, users of this network. Okay, and one thing that we do need, I've noticed, is a driving license. So if you are the owner of a car, and this one's a very strange looking soft top in here, or you've just passed your driving test, you know that you need to get a certificate in order to authenticate and authorize you to gain access to a public road here in the UK. What you don't do is send your request. Once the examiner has said, congratulations, Phil, you've passed your driving test, you don't send the request to number 10 Downing Street for two reasons. One, because they're not bothered. Boris Johnson is not going to sign off on your driving license request because that's not his job to do that. And also, you can't gain access to him. Okay, so there's a big fence at the end of number 10 Downing Street, which blocks him off the network. They've actually physically taken him off of the network so that us, the public, can't get direct access to him. Okay, but I have noticed that periodically he comes online. So every Wednesday he goes to the big house and he updates us and we update him. So, and again, it's all done in a nice, safe, secure manner. I also don't send my request for a driving license to the Ministry of Transport because, yeah, they deal with cars, okay, but they also deal with boats and planes and trains and stuff. And they're very busy with trains at the moment, I believe. And so also it's not their job to issue me with a certificate, which is a driver's license. So what they've done is they've appointed a subordinate, which is a driving license authority, of which in the UK, I think it's true to say, we only have one office that looks after us, so one department, which is, I think it's still down in South Wales, Swansea. And the good people down at the DVLA, they check your credentials. So when you put your request in, you know that you're sending it to the DVLA. You send your signed request from the examiner to say that you are now authenticated and authorized to have a driver's license. And so they do the check. They do the admin. Based on the fact that, yes, you are authenticated and authorized to now have a driver's license, they now issue you with a standard certificate, which is a driver's license, a UK driver's license. Now, if you have a driver's license, you can take a look at it and you can compare it to other people's driver's licenses. And again, up and down the country, you will find that they are all pretty much stamped out of the same template. Okay, they are all a little bit different because some of them allow you to do different things. And of course, they will all have different identifying features on them because they're not all issued to the same person. So this one's been issued to Bob. So it's issued to the user and it has a validity period. And it also allows the bearer to know exactly what you can use that for, and indeed a recipient to know what it's used for as well. So if you take a look at your driver's license, you can see all of these details on it. If you take a look at your driver's license, you'll see that it's been issued to you by the DVLA. The DVLA are working on behalf of the Ministry of Transport, and the Ministry of Transport are working on behalf of Her Majesty's government. And here is my trust, the hierarchical trust, which have been put into place for that particular certificate. And so my driver's license is a particularly good example of a certificate which doesn't necessarily indicate the fact that it's come from the Ministry of Transport or from Her Majesty's government, but subliminally, if you like, if you follow that chain of trust through, you will see that that's all intact. If at any given point the Ministry of Transport or Her Majesty's government become compromised, then my driver's license is no longer valid. Okay, and of course, if the DVLA becomes compromised, then it's no longer valid. So this is one reason, CA compromise, for example, of why certificates may become invalid. That's a very rare event. Okay, a very rare event, but occasionally it has happened, especially out on a public network. Okay, it has happened. Okay, the next thing that Bob wants to do then with his driver's license, once he's got it from the DVLA, is use it. Okay, so he knows that he can freely drive around on a public road now that he's certified to do so. And occasionally he may need to use this as proof of identity to authenticate and authorize him access to resource. So in this case, what he's using is his driver's license to go rent a car from this shop called Rent a Car. It's the best icon I could find for Rent a Car. And so it looks more like a hamburger stand, but there you go. So at Rent a Car, I've noticed, I've rented cars before, you've probably done the same, is they're not really too bothered by you as a person at this moment in time. So again, the customer experience is obviously very good, but they don't necessarily look at you and say, yeah, you look like a right and I'm going to give you a car. One of the first things they're going to ask you for is your driver's license. That shows that you are authenticated and authorized to drive a car. The next thing they'll ask you for is your credit card details and all that kind of stuff, because obviously you've got to pay for it. But the first point here to actually physically give you access to the resource to authenticate you is to check your driver's license. So what do they check? They check your name. Now, straight away, there could be a problem here because if my name is Phil Chapman, my real name, my proper name is Philip. But I generally only get called Philip when I'm in trouble, which is quite often, admittedly, but I don't generally introduce myself as Philip. Just doesn't sound right. So if I was to go into a hire car company and somebody says, what's your name? And I'll say, oh, my name's Phil Chapman. And they look at my driver's license, they will see on it that it says Philip Chapman because they've done it properly. Now, the recipient of that driver's license may look at it and say, well, actually, this certificate says Philip Chapman and you said Phil. There's a mismatch here. between you, the authenticator, and me trying to authenticate you in this process. So what's happened here is a certificate mismatch. Okay, if I was to try and gain access to a resource, I don't know, let's call it www, and it wasn't actually called www, it's called web server 1, there may also be a certificate mismatch because the certificate has not been issued to a machine called www. This is when you need to get very Gucci with things like DNS. Okay, and also your certificate bindings on your IIS or your Apache platforms that allow the certificates to be used and your hosting to be identified when users come into your websites. But this happens from time to time, and it also happens out on the internet. And these are the people that look after us out on the internet, remember, are experts in this, but they still sometimes make mistakes with this. It happens a lot, I have to say, on internal resources where we don't quite get that, that matched correctly. Now, what can happen next, of course, is that the rent-a-car salesman could say, well, actually, I'm all right with this. I know that Phil and Philip are the same thing. So I'm just going to hit the button that says, yeah, just proceed anyway, because I'm happy with the warning that's come up. However, if this is you out banking or shopping or connecting onto a public Wi-Fi system, for example, and you get a certificate mismatch, stop and check. Never, ever, ever should you just go, yeah, I'm going to connect to that website and start putting my credit card details in and usernames and passwords and all that kind of stuff. That should never, ever happen. Okay, so always take the hint and stop and check. I'm very pleased to say now that most sites are now using certificates and the way that they handle certificates, and they don't actually give you the option to proceed. They cut you dead and say, now go check. It might just be a temporary glitch in here, but we're not accepting this certificate request from you because we believe it to be bogus. And we're not giving you, the user, the individual, the ability to go, yes, connect anyway. Okay, because invariably that's the vulnerability in all of these systems, is going to be the idiot user who clicks next. Okay, as an ethical hacker, again, that's all I want you to do. If you're in Costa Coffee and you get a certificate mismatch and you say, yes, I need to connect onto Facebook or I need to connect onto my bank to see how much money I've got in my account, never do that. Okay, because you may be victim to some kind of man-in-the-middle attack. So check that very carefully. Okay, if you know that you are in the right location, however, so if you know the end resource and you know the way that your certificates are working, then that's a different thing. That might be an internal thing, which you then might need to just report to your administrators for them to tidy up for you. But certificate mismatch is what we're talking about here. Let's say that that's not happened. So once the hire car company here are happy with the fact that my certificate does what it says on the tin, so I am who I am, it's valid, so the validity date is still good on it, so it's still in time. The next step they're going to do is they're going to check to make sure that it has not been revoked. Your certificate, for many reasons, may have actually been removed from you. So you may have been caught speeding too many times, and our great law enforcement officers have taken that certificate off of you. You may have a bogus one, so you've made it yourself. Okay, in which case it's invariably going to be on a revoked list somewhere if you've tried to use it before. You may also find that the DVLA, the Ministry of Transport, or Her Majesty's government might have been compromised at some point, in which case that certificate is no longer used. You may also find that the DVLA have manually revoked it at the request of the government or the request of a police officer. Okay, so for some reason, whatever, that certificate finds itself onto the certificate revocation list, or the CRL for short. Some people like to pronounce CRL krill. I'm not one of those people, I have to say, but don't knock yourself out if you're one of those people that says krill, because I think that's what blue whales eat in the Atlantic rather than the certificate revocation list. And once again, I'm not David Attenborough. So if you want to call it the krill, call it the krill. But the CRL is what it is. And so what will happen in my little analogy is that the guy that receives your driver's license will just say, hold on a minute, please, sir, just while I check to make sure that this is valid and indeed has not been revoked. Okay, this may take a little bit of time, because what's going to happen using a traditional method is that it's going to pull down the certificate revocation list from an area which is called the CRL distribution point, or the CDP. Anybody in IT not love abbreviations? Scream if you want to go faster. So the CDP, the CRL distribution point, is set up by the root initially. So the location of that from a world of IT would be a network share, could be a website, okay, where where we have got network location, so it's a network share, somewhere where you have got local access to it. Out on the internet, these are publicly posted. Okay, so these CDPs are publicly posted, so you've got public access to them. Now, this is quite a clunky old system that I'm talking about, because over a period of time, the CDP is going to fill up. Okay, you can imagine here in my analogy how many revoked driver's licenses there are. There's going to be thousands, millions, billions of them. Invariably, this is going to be a big list. And so if I have to go and check an individual driver's license against one on the revocation list, and I've got to pull that list down, there's going to be a delay before I can actually give that access to resource. Now, if that's me waiting for a car, do you know what? I might just go next door, because enterprise are doing this quicker than what you're doing, Hertz. So you've lost my custom because somebody has come back, refreshed their browser, and gone to a different customer. Gone to a different consumer site, gone off onto a different e-commerce site because it's quicker and slicker. It might be quicker and slicker because they are using the latest way of doing this, and probably a more advanced way. And again, I'm not saying late, this has been around for a long time, is using the online certificate status protocol, which goes to something called an online responder. Now, online invariably means that it's online web content. Okay, and again, once again, this is determined by the route. This could be internal, so this could be a little website, web instance that I've set up on my internal network, or it could be external. And I can almost guarantee that most of the content that you access out on the internet now is using the OCSP in some shape or form. So that's the online certificate status protocol using an online responder. And so when you fire a request off to Google, for example, remember from the TLS side of things, we've got certificates which are moving from one place to another. Your client checks the status of the certificate that's passed to it by Google, and it does so against the OCSP, which it does in seconds view. Okay, we're talking about, in most cases, less than 2 seconds for this to take place. It's no time at all to you, the end user. Okay, and in the blink of an eye, of course, you connect directly to Google and start doing your surfing and searching. Okay, but all of this has happened in the background. Okay, for the first time that you do it. These are also cached, and there are ways of speeding these processes up as well. So we talk about things like OCSP stapling, and we have caches that invariably just speed this process up. So if you've got trusted entities that your browser is always going to trust, then those are invariably embedded within it. And again, this can be controlled by using group policies or by using local policies, or indeed manually as well. So there's loads of great ways of speeding this up and making it safe and secure. And all of that comes down to the administration side of things. Okay, so if I very quickly just bang away from the analogy for the time being and come over, hopefully you can see my desktop, and I'll just very quickly come up onto, so I'm using Chrome here. I'll just go up onto the Google website. Okay, just off onto, oops, google.com. And again, I'm probably teaching you how to suck eggs here a little bit. You all know that what's happened here is a TLS handshake has taken place, and that's indicated by this little locked padlock in here. If you don't see that, invariably you're going to get a red padlock, I think comes up now with Chrome, and there's a red X in it that tells you that this is not secure. So rather than using HTTPS, it's just simply using HTTP. There's no security set up within that site. Okay. And I'm pleased to say that these are getting fewer and fewer to discover. There are one or two of them that I use for demonstration purposes that I know about, and I look at the vulnerabilities of those from a training point of view, but I know full well that Google is a nice, safe, secure website. If I left click on the little padlock icon down here, you can see here that it gives me a whole load of information about the connection. It tells me the connection is secure, and gives me a little layman's terms for what that actually means to me as a user, and then comes down and lets me take a look at the way that cookies are being handled by that site as well. So that could be something that's relevant to me from a data protection point of view. It also, I can then go into the site settings themselves, but for this purpose, I can also see that I'm using, or it's using, a valid certificate. If I go into the certificate itself, I can see that certificate that's been issued to Google. Now, this again is very similar to what we looked at when we spoke about the EFS side of things. And here you can see that under the General tab, that this ensures the identity of a remote computer. It's been issued to wildcard.google.com. So in this case, www.google.com fits that very nicely because it's going against the domain Not the fully qualified domain, of course, in here, which would be the www in front of it. So anything at all that sits in front of .google.com using that fully qualified domain name, this will then apply to it. It's been issued to Google by GTSCA 101, which is an intermediate subordinate certification authority, which is actually Google themselves, I'd say. So this is within the Google hierarchy, and we'll take a look at this in a little bit. I can see the validity period of this. Okay, so I can see the date that this is valid from to the date it's valid to. And you can see that these are not 100 years. Okay, so these are short or shortened validity periods. These will be renewed, okay, to maintain the security status of this. If I take a look at the details tab very quickly in here, you can now see, and again, in comparison to that EFS certificate that I showed you earlier, that this is using a slightly stronger or a stronger hashing algorithm in here. So it's using SHA-256 as a signature hash. Again, that's in the eye of the beholder. It doesn't really make a great deal of difference from a hashing point of view. It depends on the nature of the integrity and what it's going to be used for. I can then see the validity period, so the 26th of October up to the 18th of November. Okay, the subject is wildcardgoogle.com. And the public key in here I can see is using elliptical curve cryptography, ECC 256 bits. Now, again, if you could remember flashing back to that RSA 2048-bit public key that I showed you on that Microsoft system previously, you can see that this is a lot shorter. Okay, shorter, snappier, quicker, but still maintains a strong degree of confidentiality and integrity and authentication in this case, okay, is what this is being used for. So Google have chosen these templates, have chosen this cryptographic process in here in order to make things very, very quick and slick for us, okay, which is a perfect solution for them. Okay, that's why they've done this. Okay, if I then come over onto the certification path, thinking about my green dotted line that was going up, so DVLA, Ministry of Transport and Her Majesty's Government, or issuer, subordinate and root, you can now see that this certificate, which is being issued to google.com, is okay. If I come up to the intermediate trust in here, which is GTS in here, which is the Google Trust Services, okay, CA 101, once again, I can see that that's okay. So there's no compromise in my certification path in here. And right at the very top of this, you can see that this has all been signed off by a global sign root certification authority. So global sign root CA-R2 in here. And again, if you did a quick Google check on global sign, you'll see that they're one of the main entities, in fact, from a public point of view, that are one of those trusted entities out there, which form part of this chain of trust out on the public domain, the public internet. Okay, so global sign, there are several, in fact. So again, Microsoft is supported by these, as indeed are a majority of others, in fact. So very good. And so there you can see ultimately the three-tier hierarchical process from, even though it's a simplified analogy, that's how it kind of works for us, okay? And of course, all of this is checked by your browser. It's checked by your system. So it's completely transparent to the end user. So it's taken me a good 5 minutes to explain that to you. It's taken the user 0.5 of a second to actually connect, less than that, to connect to Google, but all of this has happened in the background. And if I was to put Wireshark on here, for example, from a networking point of view, for those of you that like a little bit of that in your life, you would see all of this take place. I'd see the client hello, the server hello, these certificates taking place. I'd see my client going off to the OCSP in order to check the validity, to check the revocation of this particular certificate, and it coming back and it being cached for around about 2 to 5 seconds, which is why I'm not probably going to be able to show you that in the DNS cache of this machine. It's a very brief flick over and back. Everything is good, and my browser is very happy with this. Okay, remember the browser is just the program that's handling this at the top of this stack, which we lovingly call the OSI. The browser is not part of the OSI; it's above that. Okay, much more about that in October. Got to get a plug-in for the second part of this. Okay, and so in a kind of a nutshell, that's what we've just looked at. Okay, so again, if you like the driving license analogy, it kind of works at this level. There is obviously a lot more to it from an administration point of view that I've kind of mentioned as we've gone through. So from the kind of the PKI side of things, there's obviously a lot more that takes place. There's a lot of policies and procedures and processes that go through this as well. And there are several ways that you can set these up. So I've also mentioned the fact we're looking at standalone and Active Directory integrated, which is an enterprise CA to us. The enterprise CAs gives you a degree of automation, I suppose, really. So I can, using group policies, using account settings within Active Directory, when a user logs on, he or she or the computer object logs on, he, she, or it may be assigned their default policy just by being an authenticated user within Active Directory. So they don't need to request them from a certification authority. They get them by default. Okay. And again, this would be a policy. This would be a company-wide policy that says you're going to use a certificate for your TPM management. You're going to use a certificate for smart cards. You're going to use a certificate for encryption. And these all then pumped out to you. Your developers may get them for code signing, for example. You may also get them for user certificates for email security. There's a whole load of these different things that are set up. And all of that is done by your administration staff up on the certification authority, whether it be the root, the intermediate, or the issuing. Okay, and so you may also have a manual process as well. So you can also get your users to request a certificate, in which case an administrator then has to check them off to make sure that they are who they say they are, that they belong to the right groups, and indeed they do have a valid reason for using that certificate for that particular reason. But of course, that then adds overhead to the PKI, man hours and all that kind of thing, and the service desk then has to look after that for you. Okay, with that. So some issues, I suppose, really with this. And so key management is one of those things which a good PKI also looks at. And so this can be central, so centralized or decentralized, depending again on what your PKI is and how it's set up. Okay, so invariably we love centralized in the world of IT, but it's not always the fix for absolutely everything. Okay, so centralizing things invariably does also mean that you're putting all of your eggs in one basket, of course, but we do like it from an auditing point of view, and we love it from an IT management point of view if we centralize all of our keys. And key management is a part of that. There are several ways of doing that then. So how you store your private keys. We've already mentioned TPM, whether that be the actual TPM chip or a USB device. Again, those can also then go on to external storage, or most widely, probably quite commonly used, are key management systems as well. And there's a plethora of these. There are plenty of these out there. A lot of them are cloud-based these days as well. So Azure key management services, excuse me. And there are plenty of cloud. Google have got cloud key management as well, of course. Things like Keyzone, which you might be familiar with. I think that's a UK-based one. Again, these all help with the management side of your private keys. Another area, again, this is quite a key point, no pun intended, from a certification point of view, is the understanding of what key escrow is all about. And that's where you get a trusted third party to look after something for you. In this case, we're talking about private keys, but this could also be things like source code. So if you're looking at availability, if you're looking at third-party integration, so your SLAs, for example, if you're putting out your development work out onto a third-party supplier, and there's a risk that that third-party supplier might go under or may no longer be able to produce that for you, you might actually want the source code of your developed applications to be put effectively into central trust, into a third-party trust, and we call that escrow systems. And again, PKI is something that's akin to this as well. We used to use this a lot, invariably from the military point of view, of having sort of trusted entities. It's also used, I believe, quite widely across the financial sector as well, not necessarily just in the PKI side of things, but for other areas as well. So again, sort of from a trusted banking system. Key recovery is also another aspect within the whole PKI thing. Again, here we're of course talking about data recovery, disaster recovery, and continuity. And there are two kind of key agents that are useful for us to understand. One's called the key recovery agent. This is a person that can, or the administrator that can ultimately recreate your private key for whatever purpose it's used for. So not just for encryption side of things, it could be for any use whatsoever. And the data recovery agent, it does exactly what it says on the tin. He, she can then recover your data. They've kind of got a skeleton key for all encrypted material on the network. These again are trusted administrators, of course, and this is a great example of when you might start to think about job rotation policy. So an auditing policy, which is job rotation. Separation of duties also may fall under this as well from an auditing point of view, so that you don't have just one person who's responsible for all encrypted material on a network or all private keys on a network, because that's quite a dangerous environment to be in, even though you trust these people properly. Of course, that you never really know ultimately when the switch is going to flick when they're no longer trusted. Okay, so put those mechanisms in place. Okay, you can see there what the DRA and the KRA are invariably used for, stuff that we've already mentioned. Revocation, so again, I'm not going to repeat myself too much with this. So there are some of the areas where a key revocation may take place, or certificate revocation, I should say, takes place. So cease of operation, you've left the job. Okay, you no longer work for the organization, for example. Compromise, change of affiliation, so you've moved from one department to another, so you no longer need the code signing one, you need a different signing certificate, for example. Okay, and it's simply expired, it's run out of its validity. There's the CRL then. So again, little slide that explains those abbreviations to you. So the CRIL, as I don't like to call it, the CRL distribution point, and the online responder, which uses this online certificate status protocol. Okay, those are still used. Okay, so don't think the CDP is no longer well, the CDP is still with us, but the way that it's affected generally is different these days. And the OCSP really is taken over on the internet side of things. So happy with that. Again, I've done that for you. So again, I've leapt ahead of myself doing the demo side of things. So the final module you may be pleased to hear, although I've had a great time so far. I'm just logging into Teams to make sure that I can see what's happening in the real world. Okay, so issues and jurisdiction. This will be a brief overview of the management side of things, if you like. So sort of coming away from the technical side of things, coming a little bit away from the cryptographic, from all that number crunching and things like this. Let's get down into the management side of things and start thinking about the fundamentals, I suppose, really about issues that you may have with it. So I've kind of layered this in, hopefully, as we've gone through this morning, gone through the course. And again, it's not all about goodness. Okay, so when we're looking at cryptographic systems, I've mentioned the fact that there could be performance issues. There will be performance issues. In fact, there will also be administrative burden and overhead and cost put into place. Like with everything that you layer in that's got the word security on it, it's going to come at a cost. Okay, that sharp intake of breath at those meetings that you have when you say, you know, we need a new firewall, and the managers then say, well, how much profit are we going to get from you putting a new firewall in, Phil? And you say, well, none, really. None at all. Okay, and so good luck with that. Okay, good luck with that. But of course, these days, people know what they're worth. Things that we've mentioned then, so latency, scalability as well, so whether or not you can actually scale it across your whole enterprise, across your whole estate, bearing in mind that applications, communication between applications, communications between different devices and operating systems might be stuck for you. Key management that we've just mentioned. Cloud support, so remember that the cloud is not an emerging market. That's a market that's been with us for a long time these days. It's like a lot of things really from a design point of view. If there are any developers out there, anybody that's part of the project management team, now, of course, security is in by design at the top of that. I'm saying, there's a big smile on my face when I'm saying this, because that's what we preach and that's what we teach. Whether that's what we do or not in the real world, it might be a slightly different story, but it's very, very difficult to actually retrofit security, especially cryptography, into the design of your network, including trying to get it into an SLA where you've already got with a cloud provider. When suddenly you're interested in the data protection side of things, invariably you might need to shift your cloud provider at that point, or have another SLA with them. Okay, so think of it at the outset. Okay, security by design, that's another t-shirt, okay, that we're wearing there. And every single project manager in the world should have that, okay, emblazoned on their forehead when they go into meetings and things like that. Again, I'm smiling a little bit because if there are any project managers out there or procurement teams and things like that, you'll know that it's probably complete tosh that I'm talking, but hopefully not. Hopefully not these days anyway. Okay, so some of the vulnerabilities comes down to things like using weak keys, not really understanding modes of operation properly. So you saw the way that even though you couldn't see it was a penguin, you could see that it looked like a skittle, which looks like a penguin. Okay, if those are ones and zeros, you could do a cryptanalysis attack on that relatively straightforward. So weak keys, again, that also comes out against pre-shared keys, such as what you use on your Wi-Fi systems. Hash collisions, we kind of mentioned those. We can dismiss that pretty much. It does happen, so we're not going to dismiss it out of hand. But again, from a risk point of view, probably less risky than any of the other problems that you've got on here. Definitely random number generation problems is an issue. So initialization vector, making sure that that's safe and secure. And then we, of course, get down into the people side of things. So the weakest link invariably on any network will be the users, the administrators, and the people that use that network. We're all human. At the end of the day, we're all also default to taking the shortest route to success. Shortcuts don't necessarily mean that you're going to take the most secure route to success, unfortunately. So if it works, great. It's working functionally sound, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that it's fit for purpose from a security point of view. Okay, so functionally tested might mean something completely different. And so key management, we've just mentioned that on the PKI side of things, so I don't need to repeat myself too much on that. So hopefully a quick scan through that I've covered. This is an interesting principle. This comes in Kirchhoff's principle, which has kind of been superseded a little bit by Claude Shannon later on. So this invariably dates back some time, and this is where I started the show, in fact, telling you that as soon as you create a cipher system, you might think it's the strongest, securest, most robust cipher system on the planet. But when you design and build it, make sure that you design and build it knowing full well that the enemy will know it at some point in the future. Okay, that might be the near future, it might be the distant future, but will be the future. They'll work it out. Okay, and remember that the key to success in this is keeping your private key private. Okay, the secret side of this is all about key management rather than the actual cipher that you're using, because a cipher can be unraveled. That's just a mathematical process or a system which invariably will be known. Okay, if you're using a different key and you're using it wisely and you're using it strongly, then you have a very secure cipher system in place here. And so even though this principle is sound and robust, okay, it will be negated by the fact that you're taking every step to protect it. Okay, so again, so this is then, as you can see here, the enemy knows the system, simplifies the whole principle of this. Okay, this is the reason why this is in here is invariably is a very good one from a BCS point of view. We love these kind of systems, and again, it's a good one just to tuck away. Other issues then. So again, I'm not going to read this list to you. This is not a definite list either. This will go on and on and on and on and on for the different types of attacks that can be mounted against crypto. So again, there's a whole different series of different cryptanalysis attacks and known crypto attacks and so on and so forth. Replay attacks in here as well. So lots of different types of attacks that could potentially be mounted against your systems or your data, even though it's encrypted. Okay, we need to make sure that it's not, that we understand that it's never going to be 100% in that. Okay, and we safeguard it as best as we possibly can. Where do you go for help, advice, and guidance? Okay, well, we're starting the ball rolling here with looking at the standards that are set. I picked on these two. There are several others out there. Okay, so I'm kind of cutting to the chase a little bit with these two. That's because they're Phil's two favorites, I suppose, really. And they also are tantamount, I suppose, really to two favorites that you will see across most of the certification routes that you'll take. NIST, the National Institute of Standards Technology. If you've not come across that before, and you've got to spare 5 minutes on a Friday night before you go to the pub, just have a little look at, well, have a look at both of these websites. If you're not familiar with either of them, then absolutely 100% get yourself familiar with them if you're in any way, shape or form interested in the world of security. The NIST one is American, okay, so it's a US-based standard, but it's very international in the way that the strategies, the frameworks, the procedures and policies are adopted on an international standard. So don't let the fact that it's American put you off, because it's totally awesome. It is also, there's a lot to it as well. So it breaks down far more than I can deal with for the scope of this little course. And we dip into certain areas of this, so pretty much across the bazaars of the courses that I deliver. We go into a lot of these different areas. So instant handling, for example, forensics, you name it, it's all in here. A lot of larger institutes within the UK, establishments, financial institutes and organizations, for example, adhere to NIST special publications, for example, when it comes to instant handling and forensics, for example. And then the NCSC, once again, is just a superb reference for all of us from a security point of view. Part of GCHQ, you can see there on the title. Okay, there's nothing hush-hush here at all. This is very much in the public domain, and it's jam-packed full of information, stuff that your organization can absolutely use, from little training packages to infographics that they like to put out. You see these blattered across LinkedIn all the time, in fact, and they're quite happy for you to use them and abuse them and use them for your own training purposes, inside, outside. Really, really good. Resources, and there's sort of separate sides to this as well. So embedded within here as well, some of the larger organizations, some of you that are dedicated security professionals may also be part of the CISP as well. So again, that's a sharing platform which is used by security professionals within that. You have to be part of CISP in order to get that. That's not necessarily just for public consumption. Again, that's a great resource. It's so great. In fact, I'm locked out of my account at this moment in time because I changed my mobile number and I can't get back in at this moment in time, but I do need to get in there as well. So I'm registered within that, mostly because of the work that I do with law enforcement, in fact, and sort of as a side thing that I do outside of training. And it's a totally awesome resource as well. So if you can get your organization within that framework as well, I would strongly suggest that that's a good idea as well. Lots of different resources. And again, outside of that, I know that Laura's listening now, and I've kind of bigged up our protection officers out there as well, but I can almost guarantee that the NCSC stuff and everything else from there, they don't just use NCSC stuff and CISP kind of stuff in the stuff that they do, but it forms a basis of good understanding and knowledge. But they also, of course, use their experience and policey kind of knowledge to bring that to the fore as well. But bringing in your local protect law enforcement agencies into the frame as well is also yours, and they're very, very good at what they do. But what they don't do is just regurgitate stuff that you can get online anyway. It's all from the horse's mouth, if you like. So interesting stuff. Back onto the NIST side of things, and all of this has to be validated. So here we're talking about security standards, I suppose, really. So information processing standards. So the federal information processing standards, give it its proper title. And once again, if you get up and you get interested in this to do some research, there's a lot of this. Okay, and when I say a lot, I mean there's mountains of it. Part of my apprenticeship courses that I do, in fact, what I do is get my apprentices to actually get up in here and do some research for me, and then they have to stand on their feet for 2 to 5 minutes and present something to me. So I'll give them a sort of a rough subject. So for example, look for a vulnerability in a cryptographic system over the past 6 months, and off they go. They just have a whole load of resources to go against, and they're amazing. I have to say that it will just blow your mind at the quality and the way that they're not young people necessarily, the apprentices that come on the course, but a lot of them are sort of within that bracket. They're younger than me, obviously, because everybody is, but they are totally amazing in how they do this as well. And there's a lot of skills then that you kind of fold into that. The research, the delivery, their understanding, they get questioned by me on stuff. And I can almost guarantee that 9 times out of 10 on those little courses, I learn something from the process. They will go and find something and report it to me and explain it to me. And I'm thinking, that is really neat. Okay, really great. And all of those resources invariably come from the stuff that I'm delivering to you today as well, from NCSC sites, from NIST, and then the rest of them, in fact. So there's a little list, in fact, that's coming up. This common criteria is something that's a little unusual. If you've trained with us before, if you've looked at things like the CISMP from the BCS, if you've looked at CISP, those kind of courses, really. So from a management side of things, I have to say, rather than from a technology side of things, the common criteria is an internationally recognized set of standards that allow for devices, applications, programs, and from a security point of view to be tested and evaluated. So this is, again, internationally organized and internationally accepted. This is within the UK, we have GCHQ look after this for us. So the CSG, the technical arm of GCHQ, has now changed a little bit. But ultimately, there are people that look after us locally for this as well. And also, they from the UK side of things as well, they have a CAPS system, a CAPS as well, that allows you to see accredited products directly from their site as well. So if you don't want to go through common criteria, the international standards and agencies that look after this, you can go straight to the UK side of this if you prefer to get it directly from CESG or from GCHQ. What this allows you to do is invariably, I kind of liken this, again, simplifying it down a little bit. It's like the good old British standard kite marks, if you like. So if you saw that kite mark on your kettle or on your fridge or whatever, you knew it was good. Okay, you knew it was good for purpose. You knew when you plugged it in, it would work. You knew it would keep your cook your toast or boil your water to the agreed temperature, and it was kind of fit for purpose. But you also knew that it possibly wasn't the best on the market because you only paid a tenner for it from Argos. Okay, but it was fit for purpose. Okay, so it came in with an EL rating of 2, for example. However, your board might say, from a security point of view, we need a higher EL rating because we want this to be certified and tested to a certain level. And that's what common criteria will do for you. Okay, it will give you that benchmark of, if you like, trust in the fact that the product does what it says it should be doing. These are independently evaluated, I have to say as well. So the organizations that create them, the manufacturers have to pay for these processes to go through hopefully, obviously, to put their products in front of the right kind of procurement team, so ultimately selling them. And so you get things like firewalls, you get antivirus products in here, you get IDSs and IPSs, kind of all kinds of security devices and mechanisms are in here, routers, for example, and switches and things like that. Okay, and that's a common criteria. And again, there's a little link there as well. If you've not come across that beast before, again, it's worth just sticking your nose up onto their site to see what they do for us and invariably who's involved in this as well. So that's a product kind of thing. Just with any other system as well, everything should be well maintained and well patched. So updates take place as well. Again, these are done through approved authorities. I picked on Microsoft here again because that was just one that I selected at random. But again, this will also come from your security appliances from Cisco and Sonic Wall and Netgear and wherever your appliances are coming from. Okay, so again, a good patch management system doesn't go away, of course. So again, this is a good procedural and technical controls that you put into place to maintain availability. Okay, these be part of your business continuity. And then the actual regulatory frameworks themselves. So I'm kind of speeding up a little bit to flick through this. I'm not going to do it a disservice because it is an important part of what we deal with here. But again, we do have to think at the legal and our regulatory compliance here. Okay, and you can see here that invariably what's good for us is also unfortunately good for the wrong side of the law as well. And so criminal, serious organized crime gangs, terrorism, so cyber terrorism, again, to a lesser degree, I have to say, in my experience, but certainly similar organized crime, state-sponsored organizations, advanced persistent threats, those kind of organizations, invariably using encryption to either cover their tracks or indeed, of course, to attack us with this as well in the form of ransomware attacks, those kind of things. And again, so there have to be some kind of regulation and control to put into place. This is also embodied within this as well, is the data protection side of things, of when should you be using encryption to keep your data at rest and in transit and in use secure. Okay, so using technical, physical, and procedural controls to do just that. Okay, so again, without sort of getting into too much of the breakdown of how this works, at the top you have a law. A law is mandatory. So if there's a law, the Data Protection Act, for example, we all adhere to that. Okay, and so in the UK, the Data Protection Act 2018 encompasses GDPR. GDPR is a European regulation which technically sits, well, not technically, it sits underneath a law. It's been embodied within the Data Protection Act here in the UK. It's not going to go away after post-Brexit. So we still lovingly refer to it, obviously, as GDPR. And those of you that have done GDPR courses, I've sat in the back of one of these, I have to say, and it's been right riveting, but it's been right legal is what it is. Okay, so it's more about law regulation, as it should be, okay, and full of people that are suited rather than people with scuff marks on their knees because they've been crawling under desks with network cables. So less technical and more about the procedural side of things is what we're looking at here, but vitally important to us, absolutely 100%. From a legal point of view, of course, if you fall foul of a law, not only may there be punitive fines against you, you may also suffer custodial sentencing, because that's what laws are all about. A regulation, on the other hand, invariably what you're talking about here is some kind of monetary fine, okay, or of course you may actually be stopped trading by virtue of the fact that you've broken the regulations of that particular industry, such as the payment card industry, gambling commission, and so on and so forth, health registration, and so on and so forth. So depending upon what your line of business is, you need to know fully what laws and regulations apply to you. Okay, but those are ultra important. Okay, ultra important. And of course, where to go to for guidance. Coming down this chain, we then get into standards. Now, this one, how much time have I got? I've got a little while. Again, what I'm not going to do is get on my soapbox and talk to you about ISOs, because, again, ISO is one of those kind of environments where I remember these. I also remember the British standards being in place as well. So again, these have not necessarily gone away, but ISOs really came about to give us a standard approach to doing something brilliantly. Okay, so a standard is a recognized way of doing something to an approved level, okay, to achieve success in a particular area. So again, from a world of IT, okay, from data protection, forensic labs, and all that kind of thing, there are standards, and you'd expect those standards to be put into place to maintain the, for example, the continuity of evidence, the chain of custody, production of evidence in a courtroom, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely 100% has to be there. But ISOs are standards. What has happened, of course, over the period of time is that there's such good standards, in fact, that we now layer these into compliance. So from an auditing point of view, ISOs really have come into, have kind of morphed a little bit into regulations rather than standards. But for those of us that sort of like to clean cut these things, they actually sit underneath law and regulations and come down into a different bracket, which is invariably not necessarily mandatory, but these days we see them almost as obligatory. So from an auditing point of view, what we generally find is that you will be audited or you will be certified against an ISO standard, and I have no problems with that whatsoever. And again, this is me on my soapbox a little bit, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate and being a bit political about it, is the fact that in a lot of cases that I have seen, some organizations, which are not necessarily private organizations but public organizations, try to make the standards fit their procedures rather than their procedures to fit the standards, which sounds a bit odd. But sometimes these standards can actually be disablers to people doing their job rather than enablers for people doing their job properly and to a required standard. That's just my take and my experience on some of these things. And again, I don't want you to necessarily take that away as Phil doesn't like ISOs, because I absolutely 100% do. And ISO 27000 series is an absolute mainstay for us. Okay, so from the world of forensics, from the world of data protection, information security management systems, absolutely all over this subject. Okay, and again, all of you that are involved in that line of work, which again, I have to say is all of us pretty much probably on this call, even though you think you might not be, this is a mainstay for you. Any kind of certification route that you are taking that deals with data protection, information security management, risk, technical controls and all that kind of thing, forensics, ISOs all day long. Okay, get in them and get to know them. There are a lot of them, of course, and again, I don't have time to go and pick them all apart. I picked on the ISO 27000 series, which is got kind of carte blanche against them, but ISO 27001, 27002 pretty much are the mainstay of what we talk about when we're talking about information security management assurance, data protection, those kind of things. 25 for forensic labs, forensic investigation, that kind of thing. 33, I think, is network security, and so on and so forth. You can layer all of these in. And again, from a compliance point of view, 100%. Then a couple of little oddballs just to throw in towards the end of this. So we're getting close to the end, folks, is the Wassenaar Agreement, which is all about the control of goods, international borders. And cryptography, you can see here, as part of the dual use goods section. Okay, so again, there's several dual use goods and technologies you can see. So electronics, computers, telecommunications, information security. Okay, and crypto falls under this category in here. So the dual use goods section is where that comes in. Again, these are, again, internationally organized, 40 participating countries, it tells me. I couldn't list them all. If you're going to ask me that question, you'd catch me out. But again, even though this Wassenaar agreement is in place, there are also localized agreements as well. So here within the EU, I can still say here within the EU because we still sit within the EU, love it or loathe it. Okay, we have our own international agreements as well. I don't know what's going to happen post-Brexit to them. Probably nothing, to be honest with you, because this is not necessarily a Brexit kind of thing. So these kind of international agreements that we have will still be intact and robust at that point in time. And then from the regulatory side of things, I know full well that some of you on this course, okay, on this call, are far more experienced and knowledgeable in these areas than me, especially RIPA, for example. So Laura would tear me apart when I started talking to you about RIPA, because I've never been part of that. I've never arrested anybody or done any kind of policing kind of investigation before. But we are all fall under things like the Data Protection Act, okay? I've never really been part of the International Traffic and Arms Regulation either, ITAR. So again, if that's your bag, happy days. You can see also Freedom of Information, UK Corporate Governance Code, Sarbanes-Oxley, where we're talking about this. Again, this is US finance. There are also others, of course. So we've got the PCI, Payment Card Industry, data security standards that are put into place here as well. And again, this list could be as long as your arm, in fact, when we're looking at these regulatory frameworks. Of course, GDPR fits in under here, but for us, GDPR falls under the Data Protection Act, even though they do separate quite nicely and generally are separated quite nicely from Data Protection Act and GDPR for us as well. And again, under the Data Protection Act, there are legal bindings, and under GDPR, of course, there are regulatory controls that are put into place by the ICO, for example. And again, I'll big up the ICO at this point as well. So if you haven't visited their website and data protection is your thing, it's another great trip to go into and just have a little knob around on their sites to see the information and guidance. It's quite a friendly website. In fact, the ICO, how to report a breach, what to do if you want to whistleblow, if you think a breach has taken place and you're inside of the network, what will happen to you and all that kind of thing. And the way that the ICO organizes itself is quite nicely done, quite a nice website, in fact, that they've got to do that. So again, there's another good one to do a little bit of research on. And if you're looking for other kind of areas to either supplement your research from a working perspective or from a study perspective to enhance your courses as you go through them, there's quite a long list here, and I've chosen these, I suppose, really based on the crypto side of things that I've been talking to you about. There are plenty of others in here that I invariably would allude to or demonstrate and indeed get students to use as I go through. And some of these, in fact, as I've mentioned, I get my apprentices to look at during their kind of courses as well. NIST and NCSC, you can see those. SANS, ISO 27000 series as well. OWASP, again, so again, that very good from a threat perspective as well. And so is the CVE, in fact. So you may use this, in fact, for your threat analysis and reporting. And again, I've picked on Microsoft. Again, I possibly would have cut that out because even though I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, I don't necessarily bend totally towards Microsoft, because Cisco, all of your vendors are also very, very good assets and resources to you as well. So anybody that's supplying you with your equipment, cryptographic systems, any kind of security systems invariably are also very good resources. The thing I caveat with that, of course, is from a procurement point of view, is that we wouldn't necessarily tend to use vendor websites to go and pitch. Because of course there's a lean towards, oh, you must use a Microsoft solution, you must use a Cisco solution, you must use a Sonic Wall solution, when generally what you want is kind of more of a carte blanche kind of solution to find out what's the best fit for your particular network, not just what's the best Microsoft fit. But I put Microsoft up here because sometimes we forget the presence that an organization like Microsoft actually has, especially out on a public network such as the internet, and the kind of threat sensors and the amount of information and analysis that they actually do on a daily basis, on a minute by minute basis, in fact, to look at their advanced threat protection systems that they put into place here as well. Let's not take it away from these people that they are experts in their field. And if they have resources that we can use on our internal network, which are invariably, a lot of these are free to use resources as well, we should be tapping those resources as part of our day-to-day business in shoring up the vulnerabilities of our network. Okay, not just looking at the crypto side of things. Okay, so this is pretty much across the board. Okay, with that. So again, I didn't really want to leave on a by Microsoft note, because all of these assets are very, very good. Okay, superb. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that concludes today's little session. I think that's as close to 2 o'clock as I could possibly get it, or 1 o'clock your time. How am I doing, Phoebe?
That's brilliant. So we've got 5 minutes left until the end of the webinar. If anyone has any questions, please post them now. Otherwise, feel free to send us an email at sprint@firebrand.com. I will put it in the chat box now. Thank you so much, Phil. That was
My
brilliant.
pleasure.
Very happy. And if you wouldn't mind giving me back the host rights so that I can end the recording.
And there you go. You have control.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I'd just like to say thanks to everybody as well for taking the time to join us today. I hope you found it interesting. I hope there was something there for you. Find me on LinkedIn if you want to be my friend on LinkedIn, and I'm always up for that. And again, my email address is there as well. So if there's anything outside of this subject, or inside or outside of this subject that you're interested in, just ping me an email. We're always available. Firebrand instructors, we're always up for a little bit of advice and guidance and things like that. If there's anything you liked, tell me about it. If there's anything you disliked, tell me about that as well, because we're always about improving as well. So that's very important. I do have some more coming up. I'm not going to pitch those to you because that's Phoebe's job to do that. So just check the sites for that, because there are a lot of these that Firebrand are doing this side of Christmas. So keep in the loop for that. And hopefully I'll see you very shortly on the next one.
Yes, if everyone would like to, I will send a link now to the homepage, and I will send it in the follow-up email as well of all the upcoming sprints. As I said, that we have one now every Friday up until Christmas. They are all free unless they are a course, but all prices and everything are on the site, so please have a look to see what tickles your pickle. And